highlighting this monumentality of what they're doing at the top. So it really would have been a beacon. It would have been something everyone could have seen. And now we have to go back and figure out, okay, well, what are they marking? Like, what's inside this thing that they're spending all this time trying to show off?
Hey, welcome to Bible and Archaeology. I'm Jordan Jones. My guest today is Dr. Daniel Master, Professor of Archaeology at Wheaton College and co-director of the Excavations at Tel Shimron. Dr. Master, thank you so much for taking the time today.
It's great to be here.
We're very excited to have Dr. Master on to talk a little bit about a find that caught everyone's attention this summer, that 4,000-year-old corbelled arch within the excavations at Tel Shimron. And Dr. Master has kindly agreed to come on and give a little more context for us. Could you give us a quick summary of the history of the site and then a little bit of the excavation history this summer?
Sure. Tel Shimron is a very large site in the Jezreel Valley in Israel. It had never been excavated until we started excavating there in 2017, and we've excavated now for 5 seasons. One of the things that we found is that it's a very large Middle Bronze Age city, although it's occupied from the Bronze Age right in through the modern era. But we focused a lot of our effort on the Middle Bronze Age because it's such a large city then. And it's, again, the largest city in the Jezreel Valley, and it's dominating the trade route between Arabia and the Mediterranean Sea. And so we really sort of feel like it's a missing link in understanding part of northern Israel during this period. And so we've been excavating at several parts of the mound, trying to understand this era, really the first half of the second millennium BC.
And when you're looking for that Middle Bronze, is that what led you to this Acropolis area of the site for the excavations focus this summer?
No, yes and no. We started out with a survey, as excavations often do. And we really have tried very carefully to follow the results of that survey and let that drive our research questions going forward. So we knew some things about the site, but when we've done the research to do the survey work and to do ground penetrating radar and magnetometry and all those kinds of things, we've tried to let that drive the next step. And so as it relates to the top of the site, there's an area, we kind of call it the Acropolis because it's much higher than the rest of the site and it's located on the eastern end. And in this particular part of the city, we had some confusing survey results. And we had material from the Middle Bronze Age, but also material from the Iron Age. And previous surveys had seemed to indicate or had seemed to conclude that maybe there was an Iron Age fortress at the top of the site, or maybe there were multiple periods that were present at the top of the site. And so that this Acropolis was just like you might expect in an ancient tell. It really consisted of several eras, one on top of the other. But because this was so confused and confusing to previous surveyors and to us, we tried to establish some excavation areas here just to kind of get control of it, to understand what we were missing and why it was so confusing, why it seemed so strange. And so we started excavating there initially in 2017, just with some small salvage excavations because of some things that were happening up at the top. And then we've expanded them every year since. And one of the things that's been an unexpected conclusion of our work has been that the entire Acropolis really belongs to one period and one period only. And that all of the activity, all of the major activity in this part of the mound is really confined to the Middle Bronze Age, the first half of the second millennium BC. So it's really not like a tell at all. Instead, it's this just huge monument at the top of the site.
And that's where this, maybe not so helpful in removing confusion, this archway comes in. Could you give a little context for how that came about in the excavations this summer?
Sure. We were excavating this area and again, trying to understand the sequence. And as we were excavating the sequence, we found some mud brick walls that were parallel to the ramparts on the outer side of the city. And we really kind of assumed that these mud brick walls that were parallel to the ramparts of the outer part of the city were just fortification walls. And so we were excavating what we thought were fortification walls. And as we were excavating them, we came across something that kind of looked like a tower. It was much thicker and wider than the rest of the walls, but it was made of the same mud brick. And it also seemed to be parallel to the outside of the city. And so we just thought this was one more part of more extensive fortifications in this part of the mound. And so that was my working hypothesis going in. And then we started to realize that in the middle of this tower, kind of oddly, just right in the middle of it, we started to see that it wasn't mud brick at all, but instead someone had filled in the middle of the tower with gravel.
Mm-hmm.
It was very different. It couldn't be mistaken for anything else. It wasn't like we were questioning whether it was brick or not brick. It was just completely different. And so we realized it was later, and initially we thought maybe it was a pit of a much later pit. So we thought that first, and then it started to go down, and it started to follow the contours of what was clearly a constructed aspect to this mud brick structure or tower. And so as we started to go down, we thought, okay, maybe we have a gate, because you could imagine passing through the fortifications and maybe going into a tower and having a passageway. So we thought maybe we have a gate here that would lead into the inner part of the city. But again, we continued to excavate deeper and deeper, and we realized we were dealing with something that was just really big. It was very deep, and we started to go down meter after meter, and we realized we were dealing with something that originally had been constructed as a massive mud brick structure for some purpose that we were still trying to figure out. And in the middle of it, it had a deep passageway that was leading down into the city.
And that passageway leading down is where we get the turn, that left-hand turn that leads to the arch itself, right?
Right. And you can imagine the left-hand turn was preceded by a dead end for a very long time, because we just had this passageway that seemed to go nowhere, beautifully constructed, beautifully finished, clear as day to excavate, but again, seemingly going nowhere. I really thought it would continue straight. And so for a long time, I was confused. And then all of a sudden, we realized as we sort of were digging down here that, oh, look on the left-hand side, there's something different. The brick isn't preserved in quite the same way. And almost immediately, as we started to expose more of it, we realized that the bricks were stepping out. That is to say, there was sort of this corbelling, this corbelled vault, which was the bricks, each one a little closer than the other one before, in order to make what is kind of a fake arch. Sometimes they're called sort of fake arches, because they're not an arch or radial arch like you might find. Instead, they're just stepping the bricks in all the way till they get to the top. And that's what we saw. And we saw the very top of it. And it took quite some time then from our initial discovery to being able to expose the whole thing, because it was really an engineering challenge because of the depth and safety issues and all those kinds of things. There was a lot of welding involved.
Yeah, I saw the support structure you have for the people down excavating below to support those walls or keep anything from happening should shifts happen there. It really gives a sense of just how far down this arch is within this structure.
Yeah, and of course, obviously, safety is our number one priority. And so we worked with structural engineers and sort of tried to build this out, but it just slowed us up, because every time we would go down further, we would have to extend the structure down further in order to protect the people who are working there. And in most of the things that we've shown the arch way, even as we excavated into it, empty. When we were excavating in there, we also had another structure that was inside of that as well, in order to protect people who were working inside. That was obviously, again, a high priority for us. But one of the things about this that made it tricky was that because of it being so unclear what it was, and we didn't know where it would come out or any of those kinds of things, there wasn't an obvious or safe way to excavate it, let's say from the other side,
right,
or wider way, because we just didn't understand where it was going. So we were trying to do it in the safest way, but also in the way that was archaeologically most responsible. And so in this case, we excavated the passageway, and then we carefully excavated through this arched passageway that went downstairs even further.
Can you speak a little bit about the uniqueness of this arch? Within the context of the area, this is a unique find, and potentially some parallels with arches in broader Mesopotamia. Some articles speaking to, if we look towards Dan and the archways there, which are different types of arches. What's the uniqueness, and how does that add to the perplexity in trying to understand the passageway in this arch and what it's doing in this tower?
The first thing that strikes you, or strikes me as an archaeologist, I've been working in this field for more than 30 years. I've excavated a lot of things, and I have never seen preservation like this, to really be dealing with structures that are just so big and so well preserved. So it may be that if you were to go to other sites, they had similar arches, but they just are never preserved.
The preservation.
Because it's made of this soft mud brick, unfired mud brick, and it's a delicate thing even today. And so for us to be able to see that level of preservation was, first of all, unique. So everything we were going to find was going to be unusual. But then to have that sort of superstructure where you have sort of the roof or the arch preserved for a passageway, again, just never happens.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the parallel at the gate at Dan, and that's probably the best parallel in terms of something with similar mud brick preservation. But again, and again, like this one, similar date, it was intentionally filled in antiquity, which is the only reason that it survived.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that structure, the other thing that's really odd is just the preservation. But then if we take a step further, specifically what's preserved, this kind of a corbelled vault is an interesting example of Mesopotamian brickworking. If you go to Mesopotamia and you look at places like Ur, you look at places like Mari or other places like that, you can find some examples that parallel this where they're using similar brickwork. But in this part of the world, you never see it, or we've never seen it, not on this scale and not in these ways. And some of the ways in which they're using the arch in order to make this staircase and the way in which the arch changes as you go through it, they're doing a lot of sophisticated things with this brickwork that, again, only have parallels in places like Mesopotamia. And so for us, what's also unique is to see this kind of craft tradition, mm-hmm. this kind of brickworking skill that we know was developed there, now has been brought across the Fertile Crescent and now is here in the Southern Levant. And so we really see the way in which the Middle Bronze Age does, it really shows the movement of a lot of these ideas from Mesopotamia and North Syria down the coast into the Southern Levant.
You mentioned the fill inside the arch at Dan and also the fill here that you had to remove. Is there any indication in the architecture here as to why that fill may have occurred at your area? Are there any structural issues that could have led to that, or does it just seem to be something about the way they decided to not use this space anymore?
Obviously, it's very intentional. So in that sense, we can see them being very careful in how they filled it in. So we even could see stages. Okay, they did this first, and then this first, and then this first, third. So basically, they're using different materials too as they do this. So there's a layer that they put down of almost nothing but chalk chips, and then they take basalt chips and lay that layer down, and now it's gravel. And mm-hmm. each one of them you can sort of see has a purpose in order to preserve and close and have everything settle in a very nice way so that the structure is preserved. So there was a lot of intentionality that went into that preservation. And I do feel that I'm sure they did a better job at backfilling that structure than we did at the end of the season. Like we had all the modern consultants, we had all the people sort of saying you do this and this and this. But when I look at the craft skill that they had in filling that arch in a way that was going to last for now almost 4,000 mm-hmm. years, it was careful, it was serious, it was intentional, and they really controlled their materials well. So they could basically build it up over time so that this was all filled in. They'd gotten it so it didn't have settling problems, and they were able to backfill the rest of the passage.
Does the fill of this passage with this space being closed indicate anything about the use of the spaces around it? Are the areas around this archway still used after this passageway and arch are filled, or does this kind of close the whole area?
There are adjacent areas that may have a slightly different time scale in terms of what's going on, but more or less this fill closes this structure completely and once and for all. We can see different things that they did. When they used the structure just at the landing before they took a turn down into the passage, there was some activity that went on that involved burning and involved depositing a beautiful Nahariya bowl right on the landing before you would turn to go down those stairs. So that was left there, and that burning had taken place. But as soon as that event, that activity took place, then it was carefully and intentionally filled in all the way to the top. And so whatever this module was within the larger structure that we're working on, it was done.
What are the future plans for excavation here? You mentioned that it was backfilled at the end of this season. We're all, kind of chomping at the bit, as I'm sure you are, to see what's on the other side of that stone that you found at the end of that archway. But looking ahead, I know there's a lot more to be excavated at the area, and you want to do things carefully. What do the future seasons of excavation look like as you're digging in this area?
We're not planning to stop excavating this area because it's fascinating and the things we're finding are so interesting and well preserved. So we will continue to excavate this area, but as we excavate on the inside of where we sort of, as far as we got, we'll be excavating in areas that have other preserved architecture and other things that we want to responsibly excavate. So it's not as simple as just, digging a hole down to the other side. We have to excavate that area down to the other side, and that will take time. And so to excavate a wide enough space so that we can safely reach the depths necessary to see where that passage goes and where it continues to is something that we're going to focus on. We're not going to lose track of that, but it's simply going to take time. And so we are going to invite people to come and dig with us next year to try to expand our understanding of this monumental area. And then as quickly as it all allows, we will see ultimately where it leads.
Anything that we need to add in? Question I didn't ask.
No, I think we're in good shape. I mean, in terms of what we know and what we don't know. And this is one of those things where I think there's a lot I don't know. There's a lot of mystery about this.
Yeah.
But the reason that we talked about it was because the arch itself is distinctive enough that it should be part of the conversation for people who are working on this kind of stuff. And we were going to have to backfill it. There was no other way to preserve it. So for that reason, that's why we invited in outside observers with different eyes than ours to be able to write about it from their point of view so that we had that kind of record in addition to the other kinds of excavation records that we have. So in that sense, it kind of feels premature, but in another sense, it was what we needed to do in order to handle this particular aspect of the find responsibly.
It is such a fascinating find. And as I'm thinking through, what do I want to ask you? There are so many things I want to ask, but I know the answer. Your answer probably we don't know yet or we're unsure. And respectfully, that's the answer that we would expect in some things and not wanting to push beyond what's there. And
yeah, and I think one of the things that we can say, and I think one of my emphases when I talk at ASOR in the fall on this will be to emphasize that what we have seen in about 500 meters of excavation area that we've done on the top now is that singularity of time. The whole area, so almost an acre, being raised more than 5 meters above the bedrock in order to create what was then a monument that was there from that point until today. And we didn't know to isolate it as a single monument. And now that we have that there, knowing that it is some 80 meters above the valley floor, we can also see the way in which it would have stood out. It would have been something that people from the entire Jezreel Valley would have seen immediately. Mm-hmm. And we can even see ways in which they are changing the kind of soil that they put on the outside of this area relative to the rest of the site. The rest of the site, they're using dark soil, and up here they're using bright white soil as a way of, again, highlighting this monumentality of what they're doing at the top. So it really would have been a beacon. It would have been something everyone could have seen. And now we have to go back and figure out, okay, well, what are they marking? Like, what's inside this thing that they're spending all this time trying to show off?
Well, we're all very interested to see where this does lead. For persons who may be interested in coming to help next year, where can they keep track of the volunteer signups and the information they need to know to potentially come join you next summer?
We have more information on this discovery and on our 2024 season on our excavation website, telshimronexcavations.com. And so going there is sort of your one-stop shop for seeing more on this discovery and also for seeing what's going to happen in the next season.
Dr. Master, thank you so much for taking the time. For all of us here at Bible and Archaeology, I'm Jordan Jones.